well, what do we do to not be canceled by the woke mob? And the answer was, don't let the woke mob form. Men and women are made in the image of God, not men. Men and women.
Jordan Peterson's voice resonates with certainty as he shares the identity of the one who ignited a chain of events that reverberate through history.
What is the issue with feminists nowadays?
They think that the idea that our culture is a tyrannical patriarchy is an axiomatic truth. Well, I think that's complete nonsense. The insistence that gender identity and gender expression are social constructions, the insistence upon that, the insistence that if there are any differences in outcome, that's a consequence of oppression. That's what's up with them. All of that's complete bloody nonsense. And so teenagers are wired to go along with the crowd. And then if the crowd is offering something pathological, that happens all the time. You get a psychological epidemic. And I knew that. I told you. I told the Senate this in 2017. And why did I know? Well, I knew the literature. We've tracked psychological epidemics going back 300 years.
In a video, you said that the problem with those angry women is that since at the end of the argument you cannot fight physically, you can't really deal with them.
That's not what I said. I said that that's one of the things that keeps conversation between men civil. Women can't argue with angry women. Women are often bullied by angry women. Yeah, well, the multiple personality disorder, that happened there too, because you'd get a lot of attention from media, especially the people who are the first, who display the first symptoms of multiple personality disorder. You know, get a psychologist or a psychiatrist or an alienist, if you go back far enough.
His unwavering gaze captures the gravity of the revelation, spotlighting the pivotal role played by the initiator in shaping the course of events.
And so someone comes to you, maybe they have body dysmorphia. And so maybe they're anorexic, that's a form of body dysmorphia. And so the first thing you do, if you have any sense, is you note that that's stemming out of an underlying, more global proclivity to suffer from depression and anxiety. So that's the big elephant in the room, depression and anxiety. So if the trans activist types say, well, the body dysmorphic types are more likely to have thoughts, it's not because they have body dysmorphia, it's because they're prone to depression and anxiety, and depressed and anxious people are more likely to have thoughts. And maybe body dysmorphia adds a bit to that, but nobody really knows. Probably adds some. But the fundamental issue is one of depression and anxiety. So now you're suffering from, unspecified self-consciousness, and the culture twists around to offer you a narrative. And the narrative is, oh, well, you're in the wrong body. And then the carrot is, and this is part of it gets extraordinarily pathological, is a lot of these kids who are suffering from this alienation are unpopular. And now they're being enticed. It's like, yeah, well, you're not unpopular. You're interestingly special. So if you just take this carrot, you're the opposite. All of a sudden, you're not a victim. You're a brave, you're a brave seeker after your redemptive identity. And now you can be elevated and you can be treated specially. And my God, if you're an unpopular teenager, how could anything be possibly more attractive than that? And then you also think, well, why are teenagers gullible in that way? Why do they go along with the crowd? And the answer to that is, that's what you're supposed to do when you're a teenager. That's your job, right? Because first of all, you're with your parents and you're not yet a fully fledged individual. So what you have to do is you have to become part of the group.
His words transform into a beacon of insight, guiding society to recognize the significance of the figure who started it all.
I don't understand why people would even begin to conceptualize the world that way. Better in what way?
Roles of power in businesses, politically, men pretty much rule the world, no?
Well, what about in warfare? What about in dangerous jobs? Who gets in war? Who fights in war? Men.
You have women who are soldiers in the army nowadays. Yeah. It's opening more and more.
Yeah. Well, no, we're not going to go down that.
Is a woman soldier not as good as a man soldier?
I don't know. whether a woman soldier is as good as a man soldier. I know that in most armed forces, women aren't placed in high combat frontline positions. Well, this is partly tied up with this issue of the college. So here's one way into it. So now professionals are bound by law to offer gender-affirming advice. They're bound by law. Okay, so this is what this means. If you bring your 13-year-old in to be evaluated by a physician or a psychologist, and maybe she has high levels of neuroticism, tilting towards depression and anxiety, and then that's making itself manifest in bodily discomfort, now that's being shaped by this cultural fad that insists that if you feel uncomfortable in your body, it's because you're of the opposite gender. That's the psychological epidemic part of it. And we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. But now you're duty bound by law, if you're a professional, to say, oh, you think you're a boy? Yeah, absolutely. You absolutely, 100%, you are. What can we do to facilitate that move forward? And that all got, what would you call, pushed into the law under the guise of the elimination of conversion therapy. So, unbelievable. Now, the problem with that is, you see, if you're a therapist or a physician, you don't affirm someone's identity. That's not your job. And your job is not to deny their identity either. Your job is to help them explore their identity and hopefully to develop it.
As the nation listens, Peterson's voice becomes a catalyst for discussions that delve into the far-reaching implications of the initiator's actions.
According to you, what is a real man, or what should he be?
You should want the best for people, for you, for your family, and for the community. Courage is a good thing. Courage in the face of life's difficulties. You know, one of the things I suggest to the people who are watching my videos, for example, is that a good ambition is to be the most reliable person at your father's funeral.
You think that nowadays men lack virility, that they're not men anymore?
No, I think that you could make a case that they are punished for those virtues and so are less likely to feel confident in their expression or development.
You feel that society nowadays tells men that it's not okay to be ambitious?
I think it's definitely the case that happens. It's certainly not encouraged, it's discouraged because of the confusion between, the purposeful confusion, in my estimation, between power and competence.
You think the hierarchy of the patriarchal system is a good one?
Well, first of all, I'm not convinced that the theory that what we have is a patriarchal hierarchy is correct to begin with. I don't think that way, because I don't understand precisely what that means. Does that mean that women had no role in shaping our society? It's only been the last 10 years that people have made the presumption that it's self-evident that what we live in is a patriarchy. What women haven't contributed? Is this the point we're making? Is that women haven't contributed to our society? They just weren't there until, 1965. And all of a sudden they took their place. All the women before that weren't doing anything at all.
Within his potent narrative takes root a mosaic of exploration, inviting viewers to unravel the complexities of causality and consequence.
I don't do that.
No,
that's
I
ridiculous. The Taoists have done that for 3,000 years.
I know, but
right, it's not me.
No.
Right.
But you're selecting, right? You write a book, which is an antidote to chaos, and you're selecting the stories in which the feminine is chaos, and also I'm
observing and collecting the stories.
But it's adding up, right? So you also talk about the importance of the Bible, in which women are deemed subservient.
No, they're not. That's complete rubbish. How in the world could you possibly derive that idea from biblical readings? The most fundamental statement in the Bible, and this is a miraculous statement, it's absolutely incomprehensible that it was written some thousands of years ago. Men and women are made in the image of God. Not men. Men and women.
But you know that there's also passages in there which do posit the woman as subservient.
What passages are you referring to?
Well, where it's told to Adam and Eve that women will henceforth have to obey their husband.
Well,
That's just a paraphrase.
That wasn't what would you say? That wasn't a divine injunction. It was a terrible warning.
Okay,
It wasn't a statement about how society should be structured. It was a statement about the inevitability of that happening because women were going to be vulnerable in pregnancy and in child raising.
The spotlight sharpens on Peterson, a revealer of pivotal truths, unafraid to challenge established narratives and illuminate the pivotal initiator.
I watched my colleagues take micro-retreat 5,000 times. And then by the end of that, they were in a situation where they had to ask a question like, well, what do we do to not be canceled by the woke mob? And the answer was, don't let the woke mob form. Well, it has formed. It's like, yeah, it has. A little late now. Now you're paying the price for all that avoidance, which we just talked about in the first part of this discussion. And so, you know when you quell what you have to say, right? And you experience an inner disquiet, you think, I have something to say, but I'm afraid to say it. It's like, fair enough. How afraid are you not to say it? People have complimented me on my bravery, which is something I'm not particularly comfortable with, because I don't think it's the right way of thinking about it. It's not how I think about it. I think, no, I'm just afraid of the right thing. It's not that I'm brave. I'm way more afraid of not saying what I have to say than I am of saying it. And the consequences of saying what I have had to say have been dramatic and sometimes very painful, and also extremely rewarding, both of those at the same time. But I know perfectly well what the consequence of not saying what you have to say is, because I studied totalitarianism for 40 years. And in a totalitarian state, no one ever says what they have to say.
In this pivotal juncture, Jordan Peterson stands as a guide to understanding the source of events, urging society to grasp the significance of the one who set things in motion.
What do you mean, it may feel to women? Like, there's no injunction in that story.
No, but
that men have the right to lord it over women. No, it's not in the story.
It's not just this story, of course.
But what is it? There's heroic females in the entire corpus of the Old Testament, and there's no evidence whatsoever throughout the biblical corpus that women are any less worthy of the kingdom of God than men. And so this is part of the same thing. There's the pervasive notion that even the fundamental documents of Western civilization have this inbuilt patriarchal bias. Look, as far as I'm concerned, that statement that men and women are both made in the image of God, which gives them each a spark of divinity, out of that tiny little statement grew the entire idea of individual human rights. The idea that the state couldn't impose its purview past a certain limit, and that idea grew over thousands of years to provide the relatively free society that we have now. And to assume that is associated in some manner with patriarchal oppression, especially given the time when that was written, is just think about how unlikely it was that long ago those words were penned. So, one of the things I observed at the University of Toronto when I worked there is I could see this woke nonsense emerging over decades. I really started to see it when I was at McGill University in the 90s, with the encroachment of ethics committees on the research enterprise. And I could just see it just doing this like this year after year. And you could see it when I was a graduate student. And I went to Harvard after I was at McGill, and it was pretty under control there in the 90s when I was there. The psychology department there the people there were pretty damn tough, and they were in charge, like the adults. And a lot of them really were adults, and they were smart people. We met some remarkable people there. And then I went to the University of Toronto, and it wasn't the same caliber as Harvard. And unsurprisingly, because Harvard's a very high caliber university. And then I would observe my faculty colleagues retreating. So the administration, which has ballooned out of control over the last 30 years in universities, just incrementally move forward with increasingly intrusive demands. Well, the funny thing is that I'm not so much against, when I do this is why interviews are so strange. Mm-hmm. When I do my lectures, I don't talk politically. I'm not against things. I'm for individual people. Individual people. So get out there, do your best, tell the truth, set the world in order, have a family, accept some responsibility, fix up your community, and take the beam out of your own eye before you worry about the mote in your neighbors.